Hello, welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. We are approaching the end of a long series of stories called Myra and the Online School for Adventuring. I hope you've been enjoying them. If you're just starting Stories for Wonderful Children, you should back up to the very beginning and listen to the stories from the start. If you've been listening all along, we're rapidly approaching the conclusion. Graduation day. I hope you're having fun. It was the night before the nights of the full moon, which made it not nearly as dark as Myra would have liked. She was standing at the bottom of the Clocktower, concealed in the shadows of some bushes, and keeping lookout. She was looking out for she wasn't really sure what. Stalker llamas or campus security, obviously. The administrator, although that seemed unlikely. Anyone who's too curious or who might be likely to look up and notice a shape that shouldn't be there, ascending the Clocktower in the middle of the night under an almost full moon. Myra heard a slight scuffing noise and glanced up. Chelsea was, at this point, about a third of the way up the tower. Chelsea was the best climber in the sneaker class. They all acknowledged that. If there had been any doubt about it, it would have been settled by her stunt with stealing the flag off the campus administration building a few weeks before. But they were doing something that they all agreed they really didn't want to get caught at. So Chelsea was doing the climbing, and Myra and Antoine were doing the looking out. Antoine was on the other side of the tower. Tweety was nearby. Myra wasn't exactly sure where, because Tweety said it was better that way. Tweety said, "Look, if you need me, I'll be there." Myra said, "Okay." And so she was keeping herself on her toes by trying to figure out where Tweety was. That was sort of her routine. Glance up at Chelsea to make sure she hadn't fallen yet. She wasn't really sure why she needed to do that part, since really if Chelsea had fallen, she wouldn't need to look up to find her, but she did it anyway, just checking on her progress. And then she was looking around to see if there was anyone approaching. So far, that part had been really boring, because it was 2 a.m. and finals were approaching, and people were either studying or asleep and not wandering around campus or climbing clock towers in the middle of the night. Myra scanned slowly all the shadows around her. It was really not right that someone 7 feet tall should be as good at hiding as Tweety was, but
Tweety's a rock kitten.
Yes, and very committed. So Myra glanced up at Chelsea again. She was about halfway up the clock tower now. And then Myra heard the faint call of a night bird, which sounded mostly like a night bird, but really to Myra's ear sounded more like Antoine trying to sound like a night bird, because that was the alarm signal that they had agreed upon. Myra glanced around to make sure there was nothing happening on her side of the tower, glanced up again at Chelsea, and then began to slink her most silently around the edge of the tower to see what had caught Antoine's attention. When she rounded the edge of the tower to where Antoine was, she saw 2 things immediately. One was that Antoine was not hiding. He was standing out a couple feet away from the tower, looking in the direction of the forest. Myra approached him. "What are you doing?" she said. "You're not supposed to be seen when you're keeping lookout." Antoine said nothing, but just pointed towards the edge of the forest. And Myra could see movement there. "That could be anything," she said. Antoine said, "Yeah, but maybe we should go have Tweety check it out." Myra looked around. "We don't know where Tweety is," she said. Tweety just said that Tweety would be here if we needed Tweety." "And so Tweety is," said Tweety from behind them. Myra and Antoine both jumped. "That is annoying and impressive," said Myra. "I know," said Tweety. Myra said, "Look, can you go check out what's going on at the edge of the forest? There's movement in the trees there, and we can't tell what it is, but this would be a really bad...
just leave it alone, because then it won't bother you and you won't bother it.
This would be a really bad time for surprises, so I'm going to go check on Chelsea. And can you go reconnoiter?" "Absolutely," said Tweety. "Watching you all looking for me was getting boring." Myra stuck out her tongue at Tweety's back, but Tweety was already headed quietly, slipping from shadow to shadow, towards the edge of the forest. Myra walked back around to her side of the clock tower and glanced up, just in time to see Chelsea disappearing over the edge into the windows of the belfry where the bells were. Myra knew that up there, in the silent dark, Chelsea was opening up her thieves' bag and slipping out a book that they had carefully purloined from the library, and also the freshest cinnamon roll they could sneak out of the cafeteria, and placing them where they could not be missed by George when he came up to ring the first morning bells at 7 a.m. At that point, they were going to be observing from a safe distance through a spyglass to see if George experienced a sudden transformation. Myra glanced around again. Off in the distance, she saw a couple students coming back late to their dorm from the tavern. "They're going to be in trouble if they don't study," Myra thought to herself. And then thought to herself again, "I'm going to be in trouble if I don't study. We really have to get this whole saving the world thing sorted out so that I can also pass my classes." She glanced up at another scuffing sound from above to see that Chelsea had secured a rope and was now rappelling down the side of the clock tower. This seemed like the easiest part, but Myra held her breath. Professor Tad had showed them how to tie a rope in such a way that it would hold your steady weight for rappelling, but then could be untied by a series of sharp jerks in just the right pattern so that the knot slipped. But he had also had them practice it at very low heights over very soft pads, because it took a little while to get it right, and they had all experienced a number of knot failures before he had declared them distinctly adequate. He had not, Myra guessed, anticipated that they were actually going to be putting this knowledge to use in anything dangerous like rappelling down the side of the clock tower. But Chelsea did not disappoint. She was the best of them when it came to climbing, and apparently to rappelling as well, because she slid safely to the ground next to Myra. Myra waited, not wanting to disturb her concentration, while Chelsea jerked on the rope in the pattern that left it slithering down from the heights and landing in a pile at their feet. Then Myra helped her coil it, whispering, "There's something going on." There was movement at the edge of the forest, and Tweety went to go check it out. They headed around the side of the tower, and then joined by Antoine, headed toward the forest. They could see movement there still, and as they approached, they could see Tweety standing there, looking at the forest. "There's something there," said Tweety, "but as I got closer, it went back in." "Okay," said Myra. "Do you think we ought to yell hello or something?" Tweety shrugged. "We're done doing what we needed to do. I think we should just go back to our dorms." And as Tweety said that, 2 deer stepped out of the forest. Myra regarded them, and they looked back. They walked toward Myra, and she could see from their movements that they were not entirely well, injured or something. "Wonder what happened," she said, looking at them. Tweety shrugged. Who knows? A lot of dangerous things in the forest. But why are they here? Myra said. She looked at them closely, and then looked closer. Hey, she said, I think this is Veer. And she looked over to the one, she said, I think that one's Doa. Are you sure? Said Antoine. I have trouble telling them apart sometimes. I do too, said Myra. I'm not sure, but I don't know. This one just sort of has a Veer kind of look to it. The deer sort of lowered its head and butted gently against Myra. You are Veer, aren't you? She said. We've got to find out why they're here. They shouldn't be here until they turn back into their human forms tomorrow night when it's a full moon. Yeah, said Tweety. Why come early? And why come early and injured, said Chelsea. We've got to find out tonight. We can't wait. Let's go find Willow. Can Willow talk to deer? Asked Myra. Tweety said, I can try Wombat. No, said Myra. Actually, on second thought, yes, go ahead. And so Tweety grunted and a few strange sort of noises, and the deer just looked at Tweety. And then they made some deer noises, and Tweety shrugged. Tweety said, I don't know whether they understood my wombat or not, but I definitely don't understand their deer. All right, said Myra. Well, let's find them a place to rest while we go see if we can find Willow. And so they took the deer to the first place they could think of, which was the back of the cafeteria. Myra tapped very quietly on the door, so quietly that no one should have heard it. But the door opened immediately, and Chef was standing there, in her full chef's uniform. What? She said. Shouldn't you be in bed? Yes, said Myra. I'm sorry if we woke you. Do I look like I was asleep? Said Chef. No, said Myra. These deer came out of the forest, and they look like they're injured, and we're going to try to find a grower to help us, but we were wondering... You were wondering what? Said Cook. If I could have deer in my kitchen? Because the answer to that is a hard no. Said Myra. Do you have, some water, or maybe something we could feed them, and maybe a blanket or something they could rest on? Said Cook. I'll be back in a second. She headed back into the interior of the cafeteria, came back to the door, and tossed out a blanket, and then held out a bowl of water and a plate with 2 cinnamon rolls on it. Myra said, Do deer... No, never mind. Thank you, Cook.
Yeah.
You're welcome, said Cook, and then slammed the door in her face. Myra turned and said, Okay, Veer, Doa, you two just lay down here. Tweety covered them gently with a blanket, and Myra set a plate of cinnamon rolls and the water down in front of them. And then the group of sneaker students headed off to see if they could find Willow. When Myra glanced back, she could see, in the gloom of the almost full moon, the 2 deer drinking and eating cinnamon rolls. And she thought, maybe it was just her imagination, but that they looked a little bit better already. And that's the end for tonight.
That's a good story.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's show, but questions and commentary were supplied by my children. The theme music was written by Brandon Thompson, and our wonderful logo was designed by Silas Wendelin. If you're enjoying the show, please tell someone about it, and leave a review with your podcast provider. You can now subscribe to the show to get extra stories and longer chapters of Myra and the Online School that combine multiple segments into a longer episode. The show's website is storiesforwonderfulchildren.buzzsprout.com. Until next time, I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.